17th of September. The 101st Airborne dropped all around us that Sunday. First there was one plane, kind of low, a big plane. What kind it was that we didn't know. The other guys, they were going to run. I told them not to run. They got a star instead of a cross. The German planes, they had a cross. And then pretty soon it was right over us, and the door went open and jumped out. That was nice. The sky was full of paratroopers. It was a beautiful day. Nice weather, no Germans in the neighborhood. And they jumped all around me. And that was the most beautiful sight I've ever seen.
The U.S. Army had trained almost entirely for mobile operations. The big Louisiana maneuvers, every divisional maneuver they'd done was for rapid mobile operations. Yet the planning for Normandy assumed essentially World War I trench warfare, a grinding attrition for 6 months or more, and that it would be 45 before they actually got near the German border. And it was a grinding attrition battle for less than a month. It then turned into a sudden breakout, which was exactly what the U.S. Army trained for.
General Patton's Third Army dashes through France toward the Rhine. British armies slash through the heart of Belgium, outflanking thousands of Germans along the coast. With great event.
After the British were able to liberate Belgium so quickly, and in fact got a toehold into Holland, there was an air of euphoria about the fact that it seemed like the Germans were about ready to collapse, that all they needed to do was one more good push, one more good hit, and the German front would pretty much crumble and we would end the war before Christmas of 1944.
Everybody thought, well, yeah, they're going to collapse. We've got 500,000 prisoners in the bag. The army has disappeared completely. And there was still the thought that it would be over by Christmas. And so in many ways, the battle turned out about as bad as it could for the German army. They were slowly attrited down till they couldn't hold a front, and then they were virtually overrun to the point where by the time they got back to Germany in the fall, the whole framework was gone because everything had been overrun.
Once the Allies break out from the Normandy beachhead, they begin this rapid, incredible advance across France. Now, the airborne operations are planned to assist this advance by seizing a bridgehead, taking a river crossing, maybe a critical town or Paris, for instance. But over and over again, this advance is so quick and so unexpected that the drop zones, the projected airborne sites, are overwhelmed or overcome before the airborne is able to get there. So these operations are canceled again and again, and this creates a lot of frustration on the part of the airborne soldiers.
We get briefed on the mission, which in that case was in France, and each time they were scrubbed because Patton overran the jump zone. It was very disappointing to get all ready for something, and then it's kind of like getting a rug pulled out from underneath it.
Patton was moving so fast that there was no need of us going in because he'd go through before we could get there because he was in high gear. So that didn't make me unhappy at all. If he wanted to go do that, well, that's fine.
Just after they broke out of Normandy in France, they surrounded a bunch of Germans and they closed what they call the Falaise Gap. We were supposed to close that. Well, they didn't need us. So then we were called to a marching guard to jump outside Paris. They decided the army had moved fast enough they didn't need us. And the same thing, Flanders in Belgium. And they moved fast enough they didn't need us. We had been back in England not quite 2 months before we finally jumped in Holland at that Market Garden.
Market Garden is Montgomery's show. It's 21st Army Group's attempt to breach the Rhine quickly. Montgomery believes that if he can put a substantial force across the Rhine, north of the Siegfried Line, not only will he be free to move on the Ruhr, but he will have outflanked the Siegfried Line from the north. And it becomes a high priority mission for Montgomery.
Bernard Montgomery, the commander of the British and Canadian forces, was absolutely certain that this could happen, and he was encouraged because his British Guards Division and other units had been able to push forward very quickly, as fast if not faster than the Americans, and he was convinced that his front was where to make that final thrust.
As the euphoria of the race across France began to dissipate, it was a way of continuing the advance by making an end run around the west wall defenses along the Rhine, by crossing several rivers at once, by seizing the bridges with the airborne troops and then linking up with an armored force. And so essentially they had every major river assigned to an airborne division, 82nd, 101st, British 1st.
The most critical and difficult mission in Operation Market Garden is given to General Urquhart's 1st British Airborne Division. That's to drop on and seize the bridge at Arnhem, which crosses the lower Rhine. And this is the plum assignment. It's the thing that Operation Market Garden is designed to do: seize this one bridge, outflank the Siegfried Line, and get into Germany. It's the back door into the Reich. But it's the most difficult assignment because it's the farthest away from the attacking ground forces. It's the most difficult to link up with. It's at the very end of the airborne carpet. They are out there by themselves, isolated from the other units, isolated even from the other airborne units.
It was an audacious attempt to drive deep into the German lines and breach the Rhine River with one operation, and that operation consisted of a series of 3 division-sized airborne drops using 2 U.S. airborne divisions and 1 British airborne division, the 2 U.S. divisions being the 82nd and the 101st, that would seize strategic bridges along the major road into southern Holland, enabling the British 30th Corps, spearheaded by the Guards Armored Division, to drive up this highway. It's been called the Highway to the Reich, to drive up this highway, linking up in succession with each of these airborne pockets, and quickly get across the Rhine and get into Germany. In retrospect, the British said, one of the British commanders said, perhaps he tried to go a bridge too far.
In Normandy and Sicily and Italy, those were night jumps. And the next jump we made was in Holland, which was a daytime jump, and from that standpoint much, much more successful because we knew where we were going and could see and so forth. Those night jumps, seems like everybody was lost.
They'd certainly learned a lesson from the night drop on Normandy, and that was that so many troops were scattered so badly, and that they had so many specific targets they had to hit in Market Garden and had to put troops on quickly, that it was more important for them to make sure that the pilots they had, who weren't real good at night flying anyway and night navigation, could actually find their targets and put the troops on them, than it was to get the security that comes from a night drop.
At that time of year, they were running into severe weather problems, and all airborne operations are predicated on the weather. And so you were really, your options were varied. If you try to drop at night, you may also be dropping at night in a storm. And they'd already tried a night drop at Normandy, and nobody wanted to experience that again. And I think that had a lot to do with it. Leaving logic aside, all the planners looked at the casualties and the scattering and the horrible confusion at Normandy. And even though there were some marvelous successes, nobody wanted to take the chance because they are planning an extremely tight operation with very, very specific targets. They're not trying to disrupt the entire German rear area as they were at Normandy, in which the scattering might actually work to your benefit. Instead, if the battalion is supposed to seize Bridge X, lands Y, the bridge doesn't get seized, it gets blown, the operation comes to a halt. So they were pretty much had to get the best weather and the best visual conditions possible, and that meant a daytime drop. That also meant taking the chance that you're going to run into much faster enemy opposition because they're not going to be as confused about where you are.
The Luftwaffe's aerial response to the drops is really quite minimal. I think no more than 15 or 20 transport planes were shot down in the entire course of the operation by German fighters. They do lose a number of aircraft to anti-aircraft fire. The German army in the sector is recovering and flak does do some damage to the transports. But on the scale of Arnhem mistakes, I'm not sure the daylight drop is near the top of that list.
I never felt that anybody was concerned about jumping into Holland at the time. I really didn't. Maybe they would have later on, once they were in a plane and so forth, get a little more concerned, but getting ready to jump, or being in England, getting ready to go over there, as a matter of fact, I think that some of them were happy.
We loaded up, took off, and then started flying around in big circles. And they had so many planes, we circled around. I don't think we headed out in formation for it was at least an hour, maybe 2 hours. It was a long time, whatever it was. Because they had so many planes that they had to get them all in the air and then form them up. And by the time they got through, by the time the first guys were jumping in Holland, the planes were still, the other end of the line was still in England. It was that many planes.
We went into Holland, and that was the day jump, our first day jump, and I was a Pathfinder. And we went in and we jumped in about an hour before the main body. As we was going in, we came up through southern France. As we went across the line, our plane got hit, and there's a hole in the fuselage about the size of a Jeep, but none of our people got hit. But our plane was on its way down when it got to its DZ, its drop zone, where we were supposed to go between Grove and Nijmegen. And we jumped in at about 400 or 500 feet above the ground is all. And by the time our chute opened, was on the ground, which that probably saved our life because the Germans were firing at us. Our plane went on and we saw a big cloud of smoke, and it must have crashed over a little hill.
We flew from the same air base out of England that we did on D-Day. And the whole armada that took off and flew crossed over London on our way out to the Channel. Flew out over the Channel on a beautiful, beautiful Sunday day, and then swung up to the north, up the middle of the Channel, and we were heading to our drop zone, which was north of Zaan, Holland.
Nice sunny day. We were going in to jump, and McDonald, my assistant gunner, he pointed out the window, and I see these holes coming up through the wing of the plane. And about then we went out, and the engine was smoking. We went out. That plane went down, but all the crew bailed out. We saw the crewmen later, some of them, they said they all got out.
That flight over was about 20 minutes over land, and we had anti-aircraft flak all the way. You'd see a burst above you and then one below you, and 1 year elevation. You knew that you were getting zeroed in. But we didn't lose very many planes. But I was, in that jump, I think I was the most anxious to get out of the plane that I had been on any of them.
We were in formation, but we had fighters protecting us all the way. And you can see the fighters. You know, they were up high, then they'd swing down. You had one group that's high and another one is lower than that. So, you know, they're coming in. If they got ground targets, they can go in and strafe, and the other ones, you know, take care of fighters that come up.
In Holland, I was in the door. I stood in the door. I was the first one out of our plane. The general's plane was here, that we were flying in V formation, and our plane over here, and I was the number one person out because I had that heavy pack on my leg, and I couldn't move up as fast as the rest of them. So when we got the signal to go, all I did was swing my leg out, and I was going.
It was a daytime jump, 12 o'clock noon on a Sunday, on a big open field. Huge open field. It was very, very quiet. There wasn't any shooting or anything.
We again had a perfect landing. I landed in a cabbage patch, very soft, deep, soft, well-tilled soil, a beautiful landing on a sunny day just as people were coming out of church in Holland, and we got a royal reception.
There were no fighters. We didn't have any action, air action on the way. And we all kept in formation, and we dropped exactly where we were supposed to drop.
I think I'd rather jump than land in the glider, because everything is in somebody else's hand in a glider. If they get me where I can get to that door of a plane, I can jump. I'll take my chances on myself. That's what we were trained for. But when you're in with a group like that and all, your life is in somebody else's hands. When we went into Holland, it was flak. It seemed like from the time we hit Holland, right on in to our drop zone.
Our glider had no problem, got the air, we took off in our formation, and I was scared. The windows were all open, and as soon as we got over the channel, I got sick by fear. And so I had my head out of the window, and I was getting ready my breakfast and my dinner, and there was an officer, had never been in combat before, and he started laughing at me and making fun of me because I was sick. We got over Belgium, we flew over the lines in Belgium, and the Germans were shooting at us pretty heavy, and the bullets were coming up through the glider, and our pilot got hit. Not too bad, but he got hit pretty, so he was wounded. And I looked back, and this American officer, he had his head out of the window, and he was losing his breakfast and some dinner too, because he was scared too.
Coming into Holland, of course, we going in the corridor over Holland, we ran into intense anti-aircraft fire, but the tow pilots were briefed to go in as low as possible, so we went in at treetop level, and this was a great advantage to the tow planes and the glider as well, because we could see the enemy down there, and they couldn't move their guns and artillery fast enough to keep track of us. So it was to our advantage, but it was kind of scary to. Several times I noticed that the red flash of tracer bullets between the tow plane and the glider, and you realize that there was five shells in between those.
Anti-aircraft fire is probably more dangerous to gliders than it was just about anything else in the sky. And anywhere there was heavy anti-aircraft opposition, the gliders took some extremely heavy casualties. In addition to the fact that even under best conditions, you're making a controlled crash. And in the areas they consistently drop gliders or paratroops is not wide open plains. Holland is notoriously heavily built up and fenced, and a fence and a glider don't mix very well. And unfortunately, when a glider has problems, it's not a question of losing one or two men, it's usually losing the entire glider and everybody aboard. More importantly, tactically, is the gliders carry, as I mentioned before, the heavy weapons. And you lose a glider, you're liable to lose your only anti-tank weapon, which can be a serious problem, or your communications equipment, or your heavy weapons you're relying on to save your lives in making an assault or holding a position, or worst of all, your ammunition supply for the operation.
You're in a hurry to get out, hurry to land that thing or something. We didn't have any chutes, so we were sure looking forward for that landing field to pop up. We lit in a great field. We hit The pilot really did a good job. We lit right by a irrigation ditch. We couldn't wait to get out of that thing, and we all headed for that ditch. I don't think we were 15 feet from the ditch.
When we got out, we were under fire when we got out of the glider, so we hightailed as fast as we could to a railroad track, which had a ditch alongside of it, jumped in it and stayed in there for, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours.
I landed in soft dirt in a sugar beet field, and we made a very, very sudden stop. The glider, the howitzer broke loose on one side, and the barrel flew out through the side of the glider, tore the whole side of it out. Nobody got hurt. And so the Germans were mortaring the field, so we were trying to get that howitzer out of the glider, and they kept zeroing in on us, and finally the sergeant who was in charge of the gun crew, he said to me, "Let's get the hell out of here."
The American Army, in theory, the glider pilots would be pulled out, evacuated as fast as possible because they were critical personnel. In practice, because an airborne operation, once you're on the ground, you're stuck there, they were pretty much on their own. And I know there were several instances where individuals joined regular units just because it was the safest place to be, and others in which they stayed by their down glider figuring that's where somebody would find them, and still others where they just sort of wandered around loose until they could find a way out.
A couple of us caught a ride on a Jeep. We were held up in this town of Grave, and maybe a mile out of town, we came upon a truck that the small arms fire was just exploding inside of it, so you didn't go around it. One of the troopers with his field glasses was looking down the road, the road was just straight for as far as you could see. And we'd gone over at the side of the road and taken a leak on the side of the road, and this guy hollered, "Look out." And we jumped in the ditch, and I don't know what else he said, probably there's fire coming or whatever. Apparently he had seen through his glasses, had seen this tank pull up on the road and swing his gun around, and he knew what was going to happen. Well, he missed, whatever. I think they were shooting at the three of us, because out in the field beyond that, the shell hit and exploded. And I'm sure he's not that bad a shot because the next 3 shots hit the Jeep. It just boom, 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 and it blew up. So we made our way back to town. It wasn't very far. And we spent the night in town. And the next day we heard word that they cleaned out the enemy in this town that the tank came from. We went through it before they had cleaned up the mess too. Oh, it was pretty bad.
The 82nd and 101st both had, in the overall view, a similar task at Market Garden. They were to seize intermediate bridges to extend the salient up to Nijmegen.
General Taylor's 101st Airborne Division is given perhaps the easiest job in Operation Market Garden. They're jumping closest to the projected British link-up force on the ground, and they have to seize the bridges at Eindhoven, at Zaan, at St. Oederode, and Wegel. Altogether, they have about 15 miles of highway to seize and hold open so that the British link-up force can pass through and reach the 82nd Airborne.
Our division was the first one in, then the 82nd further in, and the British clear up at Arnhem. But it was, when we landed, we just gathered up our gear, almost like we were in training. We knew where we were supposed to go. We went, we took the bridges. There were 4 bridges in this little town of Wegel. 2 railroad, 2 highway bridges we were supposed to take and control till the British moved their army up through there.
We were sent to Ivanhoe to take the bridge, and we took it. But it wasn't a very easy process.
We took Eindhoven on the second day. It took us more than one day to get across the canal at Zon because the Germans blew the bridge up and we had to ferry across in boats or whatever.
In the case of the 101st, the bridge essentially was blown in front of them and they had to make an assault crossing of the river. And this is something that I don't think people, again, recognize one of the basic problems of airborne troops. They are trained as assault troops. They are equipped as light infantry. So when they make an assault of any kind, they're doing it without the tanks, the heavy weapons, the artillery support, or anything that's considered to be a prerequisite for making an assault. And yet it succeeded.
Then we took Eindhoven the next day, which was kind of, they show the pictures today, was like a parade. All these people just came flocking out of their houses.
It was an exciting time after the airborne came down. Very exciting for us. We wanted to do as much as possible to help, but we wanted to share and we wanted to make them feel at home if we could.
The Dutch had very little love for the Germans by 1944. The Dutch resistance was very real, and given the size of the country, in fact, it was massive when you consider it on a per capita basis. German reprisals, while they had not reached the levels of barbarity shown in the East, had not been gentle. Right from the very beginning with the bombing of central Rotterdam and the other events took place in 1940. And this is true both for the British and the American troops in Holland, that they were welcomed as liberators.
Within a few days, the German army had surrounded the town, and then we were on the defense again. And the Dutch underground was very active, and they kept our regimental commander informed of where the Germans were getting ready to attack. And my company being the reserve, mobile reserve, we would move at a run, not a fast run, but a double time run, across town set up to meet the attack. And then we would move across the other side of town for the next attack. And we did that for several days. We took a fair amount of losses there.
Despite some heavy losses, General Taylor's 101st Airborne Division was able to accomplish the missions that were set forth for it in Operation Market Garden. They were fairly easily able to seize the bridges at Wegel and at St. Oederode. They lost the bridge at Zon. It was blown up in the faces of the assaulting troops, but it was fairly easy to bridge that gap. Most critical target that they had was the bridge at Eindhoven, and although it took them till D+1, they were able to seize that bridge rapidly enough that it didn't slow down the British 30th Corps in its movement north towards Nijmegen and on to Arnhem.
If you look at what the 82nd is doing in their sector, they have several bridges that they have to take. Plus they have to take some high ground to guard against German reinforcements. The 82nd is a very, very complicated mission.
General Gavin's 82nd Airborne Division is given probably a little tougher mission, a little more complex mission than the 101st Airborne. They have to seize the high ground around the Groesbeck Heights. And they have to have that high ground because it dominates the area and also because it's the most likely avenue for any German counterattack coming out of Germany. In addition to seizing and holding that high ground, the 82nd also has to take the bridge at Nijmegen and the bridge at Grave and the bridges on the canals between those two cities. So it's a very complex and difficult mission that the 82nd is being asked to do.
I made a beautiful, quiet landing in a nice open field. So I continued on through the field. I came to a road over there after a while. There were a few buildings on the side of the road. As I went around the end of the building, down the road, there was my old friend Louis Ben Dieta. There he was standing there, and he had a whole row of Germans against the building lined up under his gun. And I made a joke with him about taking good care of him and went on my way. And I'd gone 2 or 3 more blocks, and I went around the corner, and here was my friend Sergeant Gillette coming toward me with the colonel. So that we were pretty well organized on that escapade.
As far as close-up contact those first few days, very little in our area. A few days later, we started getting a lot of artillery fire, and the crossroads that we had control over were continually under artillery fire. Of course, the Germans knew the area, they knew the important crossroads, and there were several crossroads that were continually being bombarded, and they were not fun places to go through.
I recall there was at night time, at 10 o'clock at night, the Germans started to shell us every night when we were in the woods. And it started promptly at 10 o'clock. You could set your watch by it. It lasted from 10 o'clock to 11:30. Every night we had that. Our objective was to take the bridge at Nijmegen and hold the bridge in one piece.
And they had a problem because the Germans were on the other side. They both had tanks and people there, and you couldn't really rush the bridge. You had no place to hide. And so if you tried to do that, you were going to get killed. So that became a problem of how they could do it. And they were trying to figure out a way, how do we do this? Can we cross the river? Can we cross the canal on the other side?
We went up to Nijmegen, and in Nijmegen, then that's when we was going to cross the river, the Wall River, which is the lower Rhine. The British brought up these stupid boats, and there was about 10 of us to a boat, and 2 oars, and we had to, as we went out into the river, we had to use the butts of our rifles to get us across the river. And probably about 50% of the people got killed going across because the Krauts were over on the bank on the other side firing right down on us. And they were putting mortars and everything else on us, and 2 of the guys in my particular boat got killed going over.
Incredibly brave thing across a very, very wide river. The Wall, which is actually part of the Rhine, it's one of the parts of the delta essentially, is a very, very wide and swift-moving river, and to make that kind of assault, it just amazes me to no end. I mean, incredible gallantry on the part of that division.
Of course, going across on those boats, we went down river quite a ways. We had to come back up to get up to the bridge. And so we came back up, and then on our way back up, one of our lieutenants, he stood up on the bank, he said, "Let's go," and as he said, "Let's," the machine guns just cut him right in half, so we didn't have him anymore. And so, but we went ahead and moved out anyway, and we went on up to the bridge, and we took the bridge then.
General Gavin's 82nd Airborne Division is also able to accomplish their missions in Operation Market Garden, although with more difficulty than the 101st. They're able to seize the Grossbeck Heights and hold them against heavy German counterattacks. They're able to take the bridge at Grave and the canal bridges. They lose one, but it's easy to bridge that gap. The most difficulty they have is in Nijmegen. And late the first day, they're able to seize the controls that would have destroyed the bridge, the controls that are linked to the explosives on the bridge. And that keeps the Germans from blowing that bridge up in the face of the assault forces. But heavy German resistance stalls the 82nd, and it's only after this gutsy cross-river assault against heavy resistance that the 82nd is able to take the Nijmegen Bridge and pass General Horrocks' 30 Corps through towards Arnhem to try to relieve the beleaguered British airborne forces there.
Their problem, again, was sustainability. And being able to continue to do that for any length of time was a real problem. The advantage, of course, was that they did get linked up with the British in fairly short order with the British armored units. But you still suffer a lot of casualties when you don't have that heavy weapon support, and that's what you're going to land with. And their initial operations at Nijmegen and clearing the forest and holding open the road. We're done without heavy weapon support and without a lot of air support either. And again, over a short period of time, they would suffer a great many frontline infantry company, rifle company casualties because they had no other choice to do their job.
That road that goes up there along the Rhine River, they still over there referred to it as Hell's Highway. It was because of so many, both German and Americans, that were killed on that route, opening up that route.
We were to hold the road open so these tanks and half-tracks and they were Limeys, they were English, they were supposed to go up to Arnhem. They were supposed to go up there, cross the river, and help those guys up there. They were getting killed. Every one of them was getting killed.
What the British Armored Forces are being asked to do is move an entire Army Corps down a two-lane highway. And the logistics of that kind of movement are incredibly complex. And then when you throw German resistance into the equation, it becomes a mind-boggling exercise, sometimes in futility. They're no longer able to maneuver. They're no longer able to do the things that they should be able to do. It becomes a battle of attrition with high casualties. Bottom line is that despite all these German efforts, the 82nd, 101st, and the British are able to hold this road open, and they're able to continue the movement towards Arnhem.
The 82nd Airborne and 101st Airborne did what they were supposed to do, and but by the time the delay that occurred, and by the time we started up that highway, German units were coming out from the Siegfried Line or wherever, and they're cutting us right in two, and then we'd have to get in a firefight for a day or two to clean it out and start up again north.
They talked a lot about American paratroopers. They hated American paratroopers, but they respected them. The Germans respected good soldiers, and they did not want to be up against American paratroopers.
We weren't at Nijmegen, we were near Nijmegen, and the German Panzer unit came through and cut us off, so we were off the highway. There were 5 British tanks. Started going through these trees, and I was between 2 of the tanks, and I forget whether they had all 5 of them or not, but anyway, there were several of them, and so right off the bat, as soon as this tree started going down, then whang, and 88 shell come flying right through, armor-piercing shell came flying right through this tank that was on my left, right through the turret, and the guys in the tank were burning up. A piece of the tank came flying off and hit me in the leg, but we helped get him out of there and out of this one tank, and he killed he knocked other tanks out besides the one, but he didn't even have to see them. All he had to do was see the trees that they were knocking down, and they fire right in there. About the time that the tanks were in a position, the ones that were left could get the Tiger, why he just sauntered away and was gone.
I went up to a church steeple and was a forward observer there, and Germans were coming in, and I could see them coming in, and I was trying to get the battery to give me fire, just fire, because they gave me coordinates. They didn't hear me. They couldn't hear me, they said. And all I got over, we can't hear you, Minnie. I said, that was my nickname. They can't hear me. And so by the time that I finally took the radio operator and I said, go, get out of here. Go down there and try to get them and tell them I want artillery fire on these coordinates. And you stay down there. Well, by the time that all happened, we were overrun by the Germans. And the only reason I got out of that church is the 504 come in and rescued me.
My buddy and I, my ammunition bearer buddy of mine, we come under some pretty heavy artillery fire crossing a field, so we dove into a ditch, and a shell exploded between us. It knocked me down, and he got the shrapnel. He hollered over and said, "Hey, Hash," he said, "are you hit?" And I said, "I don't think so." He said, well, I am because I'm bleeding. I went over there and he was. He had shrapnel in his chest and neck and face. And so I stopped as much blood as I could on him and used both of our first aid kits, gave him a couple of shots of morphine so he wouldn't go into shock, and I packed him back across that field. And he said we were still under fire, but I don't even remember that because, you know, you've got a mission to do, and that's to get him back to the aid station. So I got him back to the aid station and left him. Figured he would be dead before morning because he was completely white, passed out by that time. So I left him there for dead. Now, for the first time, I was wanting to get Germans. He had killed my best buddy, and so I went off down this road. I saw some Germans, looked like a squad of maybe, hard to tell, 8, 10 of them. Lay down behind a tree and waited till they got up to where I could hear them talking, and then I opened up with them and found out I got into more than I really wanted. One of them raked me across the shoulder, put 5 bullet holes in my jacket and a 6th one through my arm. An uncommissioned officer called out, "Rouse mit the hands loafing." I didn't know what it meant, but I had an idea what it meant too. I know what it means now. It means come out with your hands up. And there was nothing else I could do, and so I stood up, and when I stood up, I knew that I was a dead man. I knew, you know, just flashed in my mind. I knew they were going to kill me. And so don't ask me, except they wanted me for information. That's the only thing I could figure.
Another fellow in our section, whose name was Benny Simanowitz, he said, I can get a prisoner. So with the support of a few bottles of schnapps to get him prepared, well, he went out in broad daylight, went right through a minefield, went into a dugout where the Germans were dug in, picked up 2 German prisoners, brought them home, and he hadn't been home 15 minutes before General Gavin and others were down to pin a silver star on him. They had been so anxious to get prisoners. He went out all by himself, brought 2 of them back. After the war, he became the subject of one of the 82nd Airborne's recruiting posters of what an airborne soldier does.
We were 73 days on the front line without a let-up in Holland. We weren't designed. We didn't have the ammunition. We didn't have the guns. We didn't have anything to really do the job, to confront for a long period of time.
The length of time that the airborne spent on the ground after Market Garden was one of the longest periods they spent on the ground in the entire war because they could not get them relieved. They had a mechanized corps, other units were all trying to funnel forward over a very narrow front. They were still hoping to turn the salient into something important. In fact, they never did. And so they left the airborne troops in place for lack of anybody to replace them with rapidly.
I visited the little town of Driel, where the Polish paratroopers had landed. And they landed right on top of the little town of Driel, right on top of a German bivouac. So they were immediately in combat. And they had a very rough time. And I visited there and was talking to one lady who, her father was a doctor and she had been a nurse at Driel at the time. And I talked to her about this, and I said, didn't you ever feel badly that these guys would land right on your town, kill your cows, burn your houses, kill civilians, when 4 miles away a little town was untouched? And she looked me right in the eye and she said, not a bit. We're proud to have them land here. He said, you guys fought hard and you were brave and you helped us out, but you didn't have to live under those SOBs for 4 years.
Most of the Dutch people, they are very, very thankful. If it hadn't been for those paratroopers, I might not be here. And that's something to remember.
that Market Garden expedition was probably one of the biggest failures of the war. Right? Frankly, and I hate to say that because we were a part of it, and a lot of good men killed as a result of that. But it didn't work out. Our British backup, second British, didn't get to us. They were supposed to get to us within 48 hours, and they were closer to 5 days.
Tactically, all of them did a great job, and the 101st, 504 in our division did exactly what they were expected to do, and we were very proud of the Holland operation, although history records the whole thing as a bad plan and a disaster.
As far as Operation Market Garden goes, one of the many criticisms of the plan, and there are many criticisms of the plan, the biggest one is that it completely ignored Clausewitzian friction. There were too many things that had to go right. It was an enormously complex plan. All the pieces had to go together. And of course, a few of them did not go according to plan, and that eventually caused the entire operation to unravel.
Well, Market Garden is made very spur of the moment. When you look at Market Garden and attempt to analyze the failures, that's the first thing that comes to me immediately, is it was planned on the fly, essentially off the cuff. When you compare it to something like Normandy, which was months, if not years, in the making, it's not surprising that certain things were left out of the plan. I think one of the biggest mistakes that is made in this campaign is essentially stopping the front for over a week before they actually launch this offensive. If the Germans really were in sort of pell-mell retreat, you want to be like Napoleon and just not give them a break. You want to pursue them. You don't want to sort of stop and then start again against entrenched positions.
The British airborne at Arnhem, the operation had been planned by somebody who was not an airborne person. He had them jump and land 9 miles from their mission. So after they landed, they had 9 miles to travel on foot, carrying their equipment, and they're wounded, and they're injured, which we would never have done. So they had a bad planning deal from the start. They did a masterful job of, in Arnhem, defending it as long as they could, but being light infantry again, they just couldn't stand the German onslaught. The British lost about 3/4 of their men at Arnhem.
British planners thought that the anti-aircraft concentration at the bridge at Arnhem would be too heavy. And so the division was dropped actually a couple miles away from Arnhem, and it was dropped there, and then it would assemble there and move and take its objective. Unfortunately, what that meant was that the division right away would be fighting in two directions, that it would have one element of the division that would have to defend its original drop zone where the glider reinforcements would be coming in and its supplies would be dumped, while another element of the division had to go capture the bridge, which was the principal objective.
Unfortunately for the Allies, as their famous book and movie say, it was one bridge too far. The Americans seized their objectives quite successfully and enabled the Allied column to drive up the road to Arnhem, the final bridge location. But at that location, the British first paras were not only stopped, but almost virtually eliminated by the German defense because there were units there they had not expected, and when they saw that there might be improved defenses there, Montgomery chose to ignore that rather than cancel the operation, and it ended up being a disaster for the British paratroops.
The Airborne Division is the most mobile asset at the commander's disposal before they're used. But once the airborne troops hit the ground, they are the least mobile element on the battlefield, and they essentially become a hostage. Because when an airborne division lands behind the enemy lines, the enemy knows beyond a shadow of a doubt where the ground attack is coming. There has to be a link-up. So once that airborne division hits the ground, the picture is immediately clarified for the defender. And Operation Market Garden, the drop at Arnhem, demonstrated this with brutal clarity.
The British armor that was coming up the corridor that we had captured for them were very slow and got a lot of criticism and a lot of comments about them, their stopping for tea along the way.
These guys would just stop and have their tea. It didn't matter, it seemed, whether the world kept or not. They just had to have their tea at that time. And we could never understand that, because if there was fighting to be done, we figured that's what we should be doing.
When it come time for tea, they'd stop right in the middle of the road and make tea. And then the Germans were just shooting the hell out of them, but there they'd make their tea.
The stories still circulate, and they found their way into popular history and movies and other accounts of the British stop for tea while people are dying up front, and American troops being just incensed at what appeared to be the lackadaisical attitude. In fact, the troops that stopped for tea stopped because they didn't have anything else to do. You had a corps-sized column going up one road. The only people who are doing any fighting are the ones right up the front of the column. Everybody else is waiting for them to get out of the way so that they can move. Any experienced soldier, when he's got nothing better to do, is going to relax, because he may not get a chance to relax in the near future or ever. And when the American 82nd that had just been relieved and had been fighting, and they look over there, and there's a tank crew brewing up tea. Why aren't you guys doing something? Well, what are they going to do? Shoot at Americans? They're the only ones around. But it's, again, it's an emotional reaction by people who are in combat. They're not reacting logically. On the other hand, the guards were fairly experienced troops, and they recognized that except for the lead Sherman and a few people behind him, the rest of us haven't got a target.
The British run into much more resistance along the front than what they expected. Then, once they're finally through that, they get to the 101st sector where the bridge has been blown, and they have to take several days to get that fixed. It takes them a while to get the bridging equipment up because of the logistical log jams. Clearly, attacking along one road has a lot of problems, and I'm not so sure any division could have overcome them. Once they get across the bridge, they make pretty rapid time, and they, get up to the 82nd sector in no time at all. But once they get across the bridge at Nijmegen, again with the help of the 82nd, they are stymied by the SS Panzers who are blocking their way. The territory between Nijmegen and Arnhem is probably the worst on the whole battlefield. It's very, very marshy, and getting off the road there was akin to just getting bogged down completely. So, at that point they're stuck, they're stymied. My overall comment about the guards is, yeah, they make some mistakes. Yeah, they stop for tea on occasion, but, let's face it, most outfits will stop for something along the way.
We felt it could have been done a lot better, but it was all under the control of Montgomery. It was a British operation, and that was one of the two experiences that we had with Montgomery that really soured us on him.
Market Garden is also odd in the sense that it's the one case in the war where Montgomery takes an enormous risk. A commander who normally was always rather cautious. Why this was done, again, it's spur of the moment. I don't think it's well thought through. If they had blown the main bridge at Nijmegen or the main bridge at Arnhem, the whole operation would go down the tubes. That, to me, makes the whole operation very questionable from the start. There are a lot of things about Market Garden that are very questionable. Why do this operation? Why launch this one thrust, supposedly, to get across the Rhine? Even if you make it, would not the Germans be able to seal that one bridgehead? And if you're going to launch it, why launch it there? Why launch it essentially in the Rhine Delta? I mean, that's what Holland is. I mean, if you're going to cross the Rhine, there are better places to do it. Market Garden's a series of mistakes, one after the other, but the fundamental problem with it is just a bad design to begin with. An operation that I think should never have been sent in.
At one of the big meetings was this guy come in there, and he was dressed up fit to kill, and he had these boots that shined, blinded you from 100 yards, and blouse, pants, and God, he was a neat looking guy. And he was asking for volunteers for the paratroops, airborne. I turned to my buddy. He was in the same shape I was in as far as trying to get into the pre-flight. And we says, well, my gosh, that's about as close as we can get to the Air Force. Let's join up in the paratroops.
Well, this partner of mine talked me into it. I hadn't even thought about it or heard of it, really. To begin with, I would have put in for air cadet, but I didn't have 20/20 eyes. And anyway, Duke says, well, we'll get $50 extra, and that sounded pretty good to me. So off we went. I never regretted it.
Towards the end of the training, they came around and asked anybody want to join the paratroops. And it turned out that 3 of us out of approximately 60 men joined the paratroops.
We signed a little piece of paper saying that we would jump out of an airplane. Now, there was 500 guys in this room, and there was 2 of us, when they asked for volunteers, there was 2 of us that couldn't wait to stand up, and there was 498 guys looked at us like we were the dumbest hunk of humans that ever lived.
It was pretty easy to get in the airborne. They were really looking for people at that time. We had to pass a physical examination, which included an eye test too, on color vision and a few things like that.
Finished my basic, go back and started my jump training, and they gave me an examination, found out I was colorblind, and they washed me out. Got buddying around with a couple of fellows that worked up in the hospital, and one of, was always griping about the fact that I wanted to be a paratrooper. He said, no problem, go volunteer again. They're crying for volunteers. So I did. They told me when to come up there, and the sergeant that was giving me the examination, he told me what day to come and all of that, and he picked up a little green ball of yarn. He said, what color is this green ball of yarn? I said, that's green. He said, that's right. Picked up another ball of yarn. He said, what color is this red ball of yarn? I said, that's right.
I was 18 at the time. It was something different, and a way of getting out of the regular infantry, which was rather dull and not much, walking too much everywhere all the time.
And most of us wanted to do something different, and to try to explain now how we walked up and volunteered for the paratroops is kind of difficult. We had seen pictures of it. We had understood that they would have a different role, and that sounded more appealing than some of the other things that we could see on the horizon. So exactly why we signed up for that, I don't know. $50 and the fact that they had uniforms that we were told that the girls liked.
If you joined the paratroops, you were definitely joining a combat outfit. And that is your chance of avoiding combat once you're in the paratroops was very slim indeed, And in that sense, it was, I think, an elite group. At least they told us we were elite all the time. And that has a lot to do with it, too.
Because the recognition that you are going to be jumping someplace to assault something without any of the tools that you expect and have expected since World War I. You've got to make up for it with a sheer, blind, dumb belief in your own superiority. And there's a tremendous emphasis on the special nature of an airborne soldier.
We were brainwashed, no question about it. When you look back, we were brainwashed. We were the toughest guys that ever lived. You never could really appreciate that until after you'd gone through it and seen how much it benefited you at the time that you needed it. So we had very rigorous training.
Airborne troops in the U.S. Army run everywhere. They are trained to run everywhere. The training starts with running and physical conditioning. There is a very logical reason for that. Once you have landed and unhooked yourself from your parachute, the airborne soldier is the least mobile infantryman in the U.S. Army. He has got no vehicles. So the only way he's going to get anywhere is to walk or run. And the only way he's going to get anywhere with his weapons, his ammunition, his food, everything it takes to sustain himself is to carry it on his back.
Our training was tough. Every place you went, you ran. You never could walk. As soon as you hit the door of the barracks, you ran. If you went to the movie, you ran. If you went to the PX, you ran. And you wouldn't ever want to get caught not running.
Here you got a bunch of people telling you exactly what to do, when to do it, and if you look cross-eyed at the sergeant, give me 50, and you're down doing 50. And when you get up and you say, well, is that enough? He said, no, give me another 50.
The other emphasis was on doing push-ups constantly, and that's because the shock of that parachute opening, because the design of the harness is taken up almost entirely by the shoulders and back. And the pull-up or the push-up are the best ways to strengthen those muscles.
Every time you turn around, you had to do 50 push-ups or something like that. I could do 50 in either hand, you know, really, either hand. When they talk about Army training, ours was almost, it must have been 80% physical or more.
The jump training was 4 weeks of learning to pack chutes, practicing on the aerial tramways, landing in sawdust pits, how to land when you came down, how to handle the chute, how to control it in the air.
Then we had the jump where you jumped out of a door 30 feet above the ground on the cable, and you jumped and you were hooked to this cable, and when you jumped out of the door, you dropped the length of your static line, and then you kind of bounced along on that cable. I thought that was fun.
A wooden tower, and the platform up top is 34 foot high, and there was just a ladder built perfectly vertical on the side of this thing with no railing, no covers, nothing, just climb up there. And we had several guys that got up there about 6 or 8 steps on that ladder and froze. And of course, those kind of, anything like that happened all the way through jump school. You didn't even see the guy that night. He was out of the barracks. He was gone.
During Tower Week of airborne training, these guys are put through a series of increasingly higher towers. And really, that's done for a couple of reasons. One is to give them the experience of jumping out of heights, and secondly is to increase their confidence in their ability to actually go out the door. And so you start with like a 30-foot tower, and they jump out and they get the shock of landing on the ground with the risers and everything simulated from them. And eventually you work up to a 200-foot tower where they actually free fall with a parachute and do a parachute landing. And so the towers become an integral and an important part of preparing the men to actually jump out of the airplane.